Let me yank you right into the pre-dawn blackness of June 4, 1942, 4:30 a.m., aboard the Japanese aircraft carrier Akagi, floating in the North Pacific like a steel ghost. The seas as dark as melted tar, no moon, no stars, just the low, thrumming vibration of the ship's engines, so strong it hums through your boots and settles in your bones. The air smells like diesel and burnt rubber, thick enough to chew, and if you lean over the rail, you can taste the salt stinging your lips, sharp as a knife. On the flight deck, sailors scurry like ants, their boots clacking on the cold steel. One wipes down a Zero fighter's wing with a frayed cloth, his breath fogging in the chill, another checks the fuse on a 500-pound bomb, his gloved fingers moving slow, deliberate. Lieutenant Tomonaga Takeo, 30 years old, his flight jacket still damp from the night's dew, he'd stood watch till 2 a.m., staring at the empty ocean, adjusts his goggles, fingers brushing the chipped paint on the frame, a souvenir from a training crash back in Japan, and slaps his crewman's shoulder. It's a sharp, firm thud, like he's sealing a promise neither can afford to break. Ready? Tomonaga says, his voice low, almost gruff. The crewman, 19-year-old Koji, fresh out of flight school, his hands still shaking a little, nods. Ready, sir. Below deck, 108 Japanese planes are waking up, Zero fighters with wings sharp as knives, their machine guns glinting in the faint light from the hangar, Val dive bombers heavy with bombs, their bellies bulging, Kate torpedo planes with metal fish slung under their bellies, sleek and deadly. Everyone's emblazoned with the rising sun, red, bold, menacing, painted on wings and fuselages like a warning. Tomonaga climbs into his Kate, straps himself in, and flicks on the radio. His voice cuts through the static, tight with the kind of confidence that comes from never losing a fight. Today, we finish what Pearl Harbor started. Midway falls by noon. American carriers burn by dusk. The Pacific? It's ours. He's not bragging, he's just stating what Japan's Navy knows. Since December 7th, they've crushed everything in their path. Hong Kong surrendered in 18 days, British soldiers stacking their rifles in the rain, Singapore fell in a week, 80,000 troops giving up without a fight, the Philippines. Gone in a month, General Douglas MacArthur fleeing to Australia, vowing, I shall return, but leaving thousands of GIs to die in prison camps. For this mission, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the man who dreamed up Pearl Harbor, a quiet, pipe-smoking strategist who'd once studied at Harvard, has pulled together the biggest naval force the Pacific's ever seen. For aircraft carriers, the Akagi, his flagship, Red Castle, as the crew called her, the Kaga, a veteran of China, scarred but tough, the Soryu, fast, sleek, the youngest of the bunch, and the Hiryu, the Flying Dragon, with a crew that prided itself on being the best. 11 battleships that tower like skyscrapers, their 16-inch guns capable of firing shells 20 miles. 23 cruisers, 65 destroyers, and over 700 planes, enough to darken the sky. Their plan? Grab Midway Atoll, a tiny dot of land 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii, just 2 small islands ringed by coral reefs, and use it as a base. Then wait for the last of America's carriers to come running, desperate to take it back, and sink M. Yamamoto tells his officers the plan's foolproof. The U.S. has only 3 carriers left, the Enterprise, the Hornet, and the Yorktown, scraps next to Japan's might. They'll never see the attack coming. What Yamamoto and Tomonaga didn't know. The Americans did see it coming. And in 5 short days, this foolproof plan would turn into Japan's worst nightmare. Midway wouldn't be America's end, it'd be the day the Pacific War flipped on its head. To get why Midway's the kind of battle that changes history, you gotta go back to the 6 months after Pearl Harbor. By January 1942, Japan's empire stretched like a shadow from the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, where they'd seized 2 tiny islands, Kiska and Attu, just to prove they could, all the way down to Australia's doorstep. They controlled 90% of the world's rubber, from Malaya, 70% of its tin, from Borneo, and every oil field in the Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia, meaning they had all the fuel they needed to keep their war machine rolling, while the U.S. was still rationing gasoline at home. The U.S. Pacific Fleet. It was a mess. 8 battleships sat at the bottom of Pearl Harbor, rusting, their masts sticking out of the water like broken bones. Most of its planes were charred heaps on runways, wings melted, fuselages split open. Sailors on the Enterprise would lean against the rails at night, staring out at the ocean, and talk about waiting for the Japanese to show up. No one was sure they could stop M. A young pilot named Richard Dick Best, 29 years old, from San Diego, with a scar on his cheek from a training crash, he'd nosedived into a cornfield in Texas, walked away with a cut and a story, wrote in his diary, "We're outgunned, outnumbered, outmatched. Every mission feels like flipping a coin, heads, we come back, tails, we don't. Last week, I watched 2 guys from my squadron go down over Marcus Island. Their planes exploded like firecrackers. I haven't slept well since." Japan's leaders thought the U.S. would fold. Yamamoto said, "Americans are soft, they love their cars and their movies too much to fight a long war. They'll beg for peace once we take Midway." Even Hitler laughed when he heard about Japan's plan. The Americans can't fight 2 wars at once. Let the Japanese keep them busy in the Pacific, we'll finish off Russia and Britain, then turn on them. But they were all dead wrong. The US had a secret weapon Japan never saw coming, a bunch of guys in a windowless basement in Hawaii, staring at jumbled numbers, drinking too much coffee, and refusing to quit. That basement was at the Navy's Cryptanalysis Unit in Pearl Harbor, a cramped, airless room with no windows, just fluorescent lights that hummed and walls covered in code sheets. The team was 20 men strong, led by Commander Joseph Rochefort, a chain-smoking, coffee-drinking genius who wore a bathrobe to work. He said it helped him think, and kept a rubber chicken on his desk for good luck. They'd been working 18-hour shifts since December 7th, their eyes red from staring at paper, their fingers cramped from scribbling. Their job? Crack Japan's top-secret naval code, JN-25. It was a monster of a code, each message was a jumble of numbers, with a key that changed every day, making it nearly impossible to decode. For months, they'd sat around a table covered in papers, passing notes, arguing over patterns, and feeling like they were hitting their heads against a wall. It was like solving a puzzle with half the pieces missing, frustrating, exhausting, and vital. Then, in May 1942, they hit gold. A young analyst named Thomas Dyer, 24 years old, fresh out of Yale, where he'd studied linguistics, spotted a repeat pattern in 3 messages, the letters AF. He brought it to Rochefort. "AF, Dyer said, tapping the paper. "It's a target. I've seen it in 5 messages now." Rochefort leaned back, took a drag on his cigarette, and thought. Midway. It had to be Midway. But he needed proof. So he had the U.S. garrison on Midway send a fake radio message, unencrypted, so the Japanese would hear it, saying, "Fresh water tanks broken. Need supplies ASAP." 3 days later, the Codebreakers intercepted another Japanese message. Dyer decoded it, his hands shaking. "AF is short on fresh water. Prepare to send water after capture." Bingo. The U.S. knew everything, when Japan would attack, June 4th, how many ships they'd bring, the entire First Air Fleet, where they'd park their carriers, northeast of Midway, and even what time their first strike would be, dawn. Now, it was time to set a trap of their own. Admiral Chester Nimitz, 51 years old, calm as a lake even when the world was falling apart, the new head of the Pacific Fleet, sat in his office in Pearl Harbor, staring at a map of the Pacific. The map was covered in pins, red for Japanese ships, blue for American. The red pins outnumbered the blue by 2 to 1. He had 3 carriers, the Enterprise, captained by George Murray, a tough old salt who'd fought in World War I, the Hornet, led by Mark Mitcher, quiet but sharp, and the Yorktown, damaged at the Battle of the Coral Sea a month earlier, her hull patched with steel plates. 8 cruisers, 15 destroyers, and 233 planes, less than half of Japan's force. But he had something Yamamoto didn't, surprise. We let them come to us, Nimitz told his officers, tapping the map where Midway sat, a tiny blue dot. We position our carriers north of Midway, out of their radar range. We wait for their first strike on the atoll, then hit their carriers while their planes are still in the air, refueling or rearming. That's our only shot. Best remembered hearing that plan at a briefing on the Enterprise. The room was packed, pilots sitting on crates, drinking lukewarm coffee. When Nimitz's orders were read, a hush fell over the room. Then someone laughed, a nervous, relieved laugh. We knew it was a long shot, like bringing a knife to a gunfight, Best said later. But it was better than sitting around waiting to die. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, we felt like we could win. Like we had a chance. Back to June 4, 1942, 6 a.m. Tomonaga's plane leads 108 Japanese aircraft toward Midway, flying low enough to see the whitecaps on the ocean, the water spraying up as their propellers cut through the air. The atoll comes into view, Sand Island first, with its lighthouse glinting in the sunrise, then Eastern Island, its airfield a strip of brown in the green. Coral reefs ring them, glowing pale blue, like a necklace. On the ground, U.S. Marines are hunkered down by their anti-aircraft guns, hands sweaty on the triggers, eyes glued to the sky. Corporal Mike O'Connor, 21 years old, from Boston, who joined the Marines to see the world and got more than he bargained for, spits tobacco juice on the ground and mutters, "Here they come." Enemy planes at 10 o'clock, a Marine yells, pointing. The sky erupts. Japanese bombs start falling, whistling like angry birds before they hit, high, shrill, terrifying. The first one slams into Eastern Island's airfield, blowing a crater 15 feet wide. A hangar goes up in flames, planes inside exploding like matchboxes. Black smoke curls into the sky, thick and acrid, blocking out the sun. Sand Island's barracks catch fire, the wood crackling like popcorn over the roar of bombs. A corpsman runs through the flames, carrying a wounded Marine over his shoulder, his uniform on fire. O'Connor's anti-aircraft gun team opens up, the gun booming so loud it shakes the ground. Black puffs of smoke fill the sky, like clouds made of ash. Tomonaga's plane gets hit. A bullet rips through his left wing, and flames lick up, orange and hungry, eating through the metal like paper. Koji, his crewman, yells, "We're hit. Pull up." But Tomonaga doesn't. He grips the controls tighter, flies lower, and lines up on Eastern Island's fuel tanks. "I'm dropping the bombs," he says, his voice steady. Koji nods, flicks the switch. The bombs fall, and Tomonaga pulls up, too late. Another bullet hits the engine, and the plane spins, nose first, into the ocean with a splash that's swallowed by the chaos. Koji's last scream is cut off by static. By 7 a.m., the Japanese have destroyed 17 U.S. planes on the ground. But Midway's not dead. The Marines are still holding on, O'Connor's gun is still firing, even though 2 of his crew are dead. Their radio operators are typing furiously, sending a message to Nimitz's fleet, "Attack in progress. Enemy carriers likely northeast, come fast. Repeat, come fast." Aboard the Akagi, Admiral Chuchi Nagumo, commander of Japan's carrier fleet, a short, stocky man with a temper, smiles when he hears the report. He leans back in his leather chair, sips a cup of green tea, he always drank it before a battle, a habit from his days as a cadet, and tells his staff, "Midway is ours. Now we wait for the American carriers. They'll come, and we'll sink 'em all." But Nagumo makes a mistake, one that'll cost him everything. He thinks the U.S. carriers are still 200 miles away, too far to attack. So he orders his crew to rearm the remaining planes, take off the bombs meant for Midway, which are useless against ships, strap on torpedoes meant for carriers, which can punch holes in steel. It's a disaster waiting to happen. On the Akagi's flight deck, sailors drag heavy bombs across the steel, their boots slipping on oil. Fuel hoses snake everywhere, dripping gasoline that smells like paint thinner. Planes are stacked wing to wing, so close you can barely walk between them. A young sailor trips, dropping a bomb cart, and an officer yells at him, kicking the cart out of the way. It's messy, slow, and dangerous, like trying to reload a gun while someone's pointing it at you. At 7:28 a.m., a Japanese scout plane's radio crackles to life. The pilot, Ensign Takeo Yoshikawa, flying a float plane from the cruiser Chikuma, sounds like he's hyperventilating. Enemy ships sighted, direction northeast. 10 ships, including what looks like a carrier. Repeat, carrier sighted. Nagumo's teacup clatters to the floor. Tea spills on his pants, but he doesn't notice. He freezes for a second, then yells, his voice cracking, "Stop rearming. Get those planes in the air, now. We have to attack before they find us." But it's too late. The Akagi's flight deck is a disaster zone, bombs lying on the steel, torpedoes half attached to planes, fuel cans rolling around. The crew can't get the planes ready in time. Nagumo's fleet is sitting ducks. At 9:30 a.m., 32 U.S. torpedo bombers from the Hornet and Enterprise come screaming in. They're slow, clunky planes, TBD devastators, nicknamed flying coffins, because so many of them got shot down. They fly low, so low the Japanese sailors can see the pilots' faces, can see the sweat on their brows, can even hear them yelling over the wind. Their torpedoes are slow, too, they take 60 seconds to reach a target, enough time for Japanese fighters to pounce. Zeros swarm them, their machine guns tearing through the devastators like tissue paper. Planes explode in mid-air, pieces falling into the ocean. Pilots bail out, but some are shot as they hang from their parachutes. Best, flying a SBD Dauntless dive bomber from the Enterprise, watches from 10,000 feet. He's in a formation of 37 Dauntless, flying high, waiting for the signal. Below him, he can see the devastators going down one by one, flames, smoke, splashes in the ocean. He recognizes one of the pilots, Lieutenant Bill Horton, a guy he'd gone to flight school with, who just had a baby girl. Horton's plane is hit, and it spins into the water. No parachute. "I saw guys I'd trained with, guys I'd had beer with, get shot out of the sky," Best said later. "It was the worst thing I ever saw. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the controls. But we knew we had to keep going, they were distracting the Zeros for us. We couldn't let their deaths be for nothing." Only 6 of those 32 torpedo bombers make it back. It's a bloodbath. But here's the thing, those bombers weren't just fighting, they were doing their job. While the Japanese fighters were busy picking them off, diving low to shoot at the devastators, they didn't see the U.S. dive bombers coming. At 10:22 a.m., the tide turns. Best's leader, Lieutenant Commander C. Wade McCluskey, yells over the radio, "Attack! Attack! Dive on the carriers!" Best pushes his Dauntless into a dive. The wind screams past the canopy, so loud he can't hear anything else. His body slams back into the seat, 5 GS, 6 GS, his vision narrowing to a tunnel, his ears ringing like a fire alarm. He's diving at 70 degrees, faster than he's ever flown, the ocean getting closer, closer, closer. Below him, the Akagi is dead ahead. He can see Japanese sailors running around, panicking, some trying to move bombs off the deck, others pointing up at the dive bombers, yelling. A Zero tries to intercept him, but it's too late, Best is already locked on. He lines up his sights on the Akagi's bridge, his fingers steady now, and yells into his radio, "Bombs away." A 1,000-pound bomb falls from his plane, spinning toward the carrier. For a second, Best holds his breath. Then, boom. The bomb hits the Akagi's flight deck dead center, right where the crew's stacking bombs and fuel cans. The explosion is massive. Flames shoot 2,000 feet into the sky, orange and red, like a volcano erupting on the ocean. Fuel tanks blow up, sending fireballs into the air. Planes on the deck explode, their wings flying off like confetti. Crewmen are thrown overboard like rag dolls, some on fire, others unconscious. Black smoke billows into the sky, so thick it blocks out the sun. I looked back and saw the Akagi burning, Best said. The whole ship was on fire, from bow to stern. I could see sailors jumping into the water, trying to swim away. It was terrible, but it was also a relief. We'd hit her. We'd actually hit her. Within 5 minutes, 2 more U.S. dive bombers hit the Kaga and Soryu. The Kaga takes 4 direct hits, 1 bomb blows through her flight deck and into her ammunition magazine, and the explosion splits her hull open like a can of soup. She lists to the side, water pouring in, and sinks 3 hours later, taking 1,100 crewmen with her. The Soryu is hit by 3 bombs, 1 hits her hangar, where 18 planes are parked, all loaded with fuel and bombs. The whole hangar erupts in flames, and her ammunition magazine blows up with a boom so loud it can be heard 10 miles away. The Soryu goes down by noon, her crew waving white flags from the deck as she sinks. Nagumo, now on a destroyer after abandoning the Akagi, his staff had to drag him off the bridge. He refused to leave, watches in horror. He stands on the destroyer's deck, staring at the burning carriers, and mutters to himself, over and over, "We've lost 3 carriers. How could this happen? How?" By 10:30 a.m., Japan's First Air Fleet, the pride of their navy, the force that had won every battle since Pearl Harbor, is gone. Only the Hiryu is left. Its commander, Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, a tall, proud man who'd once been Yamamoto's protege, slams his fist on the bridge and vows, "We'll sink one of their carriers before we go down. They won't get away with this. We'll make them pay." At 11:30 a.m., 18 Japanese dive bombers from the Hiryu find the U.S. carrier Yorktown. The Yorktown is a veteran. She'd been damaged at the Battle of the Coral Sea a month earlier, her hull riddled with holes, her flight deck cracked. The Navy said it'd take 3 months to fix her, Nimitz said, "Fix her in 3 days," and the shipyard workers did, welding steel plates over the holes, patching the deck with wood, and working 24-hour shifts to get her ready. The Japanese bombers hit hard. 1 bomb slams into the Yorktown's flight deck, blowing a hole 10 feet wide. Splinters fly everywhere, and a group of sailors working on a plane are thrown into the air. Another bomb hits her hangar, setting fire to 6 Dauntless inside. They explode, sending flames up through the deck. Smoke pours out of her stacks, black and thick, so dark it looks like night. But the Yorktown's crew fights back. Chief Petty Officer John Harris, 45 years old, a Navy man for 25 years, grabs a fire hose and runs through the flames, his uniform smoking. "Put it out! Put it out!" he yells, spraying water on the fire. Sailors drag wounded men to safety, some carrying them on their backs, others using stretchers made from rope and canvas. Within 2 hours, they put out the fires, patch the holes in the deck, and get the Yorktown moving again. She's not pretty, her hull scarred, her decks covered in ash, but she's still floating. Yamaguchi, watching from the Hiryu, growls, "Hit her again. Make sure she sinks." At 1:30 p.m., 10 Japanese torpedo planes attack. 2 torpedoes hit the Yorktown's starboard side, 1 tears through her engine room, the other through her fuel tanks. Water pours in fast, and the Yorktown starts to list to the side, her deck tilting so steeply that sailors can barely stand. Captain Elliot Buckmaster yells over the loudspeaker, "Abandon ship. Save yourselves. Leave the wounded, we'll come back for them." Sailors jump into the ocean, clinging to life rafts, life jackets, even pieces of debris. Harris is one of the last to leave. He helps a wounded sailor into a raft, then dives into the water. As he swims away, he looks back at the Yorktown. She's listing more now, her bow pointing up, her stern sinking. "Goodbye, old girl," he says, tears mixing with salt water. But the Hiryu's victory is short-lived. U.S. scout planes from the Enterprise have already found her. Best is back on the Enterprise, his arm throbbing. He'd pulled a muscle during the first dive, and it's now swollen and black, but when he hears the Hiryu's been spotted, he's up and grabbing his flight jacket. "I'm going," he says to the medic, who's wrapping his arm in a bandage. The medic shakes his head. "Your lungs collapsing, you can't fly. The doctor said if you go up again, you might not come back." Best just shakes his head. "I have to. The Hiryu's the last one. If we don't sink her, she'll hit the Enterprise or the Hornet. I have to go." He walks to his Dauntless, his arm hurting so bad he can barely lift it. His crewman, Lieutenant J.G. James Murray, sees him and says, "You okay, sir?" Best nods. "Let's go sink a carrier." At 2:30 p.m., Best and 24 other dive bombers take off. They fly northeast, the sun at their backs, for an hour and a half. Then Murray yells, "There she is." The Hiryu is ahead, turning hard to starboard, trying to outrun them. Zeros are flying around her, but not many, most were lost earlier, or are low on fuel. Best pushes his plane into a dive, the same steep, fast dive as before. His vision narrows again, his ears ring, but he keeps his eyes on the Hiryu's bridge. He releases his bomb at 1,500 feet. It hits the command center dead on, windows blow out, metal bends, and flames shoot out of the bridge. 3 more bombs hit her deck, one blows up a fuel tank, another hits a group of planes, and the third splits open her hull. Yamaguchi is on the bridge when the bomb hits. He's wounded, blood is streaming down his face, but he refuses to leave. He stands there, staring at the flames, and tells his crew, "I will go down with the Hiryu. We fought well. We did our duty. Long live the Emperor." His staff begs him to abandon ship, but he shakes his head. "No. I am the commander. I stay with my ship." That night, the Hiryu sinks. Yamaguchi is among the 1,100 crewmen who die. Best flies back to the Enterprise, his plane so damaged the landing gear barely works. When he stumbles out of the cockpit, he's dizzy, bleeding from his arm, and can barely breathe. The medic runs over, checks his pulse, and says, "You're done. Collapsed lung. You're lucky to be alive." Best smiles, weak but proud. "Did we win?" The medic nods. "We won. All 4 Japanese carriers are gone." Best closes his eyes for a second. "Good. Tell Bill Horton's wife, tell her he fought well." By June 7, 1942, the battle's over. The Japanese fleet has fled, sailing back to Japan with their tails between their legs. The U.S. fleet stays near Midway, picking up survivors, counting the dead, and trying to process what just happened. Let's talk numbers, 'cause they tell the story of just how big this victory was. Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers, all of their best ones, 1 heavy cruiser, the Mikuma, sunk by U.S. bombers on June 6, 3 destroyers, and 322 planes. 2,500 sailors and pilots died, men who trained for years, who were the best Japan had. The U.S. lost 1 aircraft carrier, Yorktown, which sank on June 7 after being torpedoed by a Japanese submarine, 1 destroyer, Hammond, which was sunk while trying to tow the Yorktown, and 147 planes. 307 sailors and pilots died, fathers, sons, brothers, friends. But numbers don't tell you about John Harris, the Yorktown's chief petty officer, who spent 3 hours in the ocean before being rescued, and then went back to work repairing ships. They don't tell you about Thomas Dyer, the codebreaker, who cried when he heard the Akagi was sunk, because he knew his work had saved lives. They don't tell you about Best, who spent 6 months in the hospital recovering from his collapsed lung, and who never flew again, but never regretted that day. What the numbers do tell you is this: Midway was the turning point of the Pacific War. Before June 4, Japan was on the attack, taking islands, sinking ships, winning battles. After Midway, Japan was on the run. They never built another aircraft carrier that could match America's. By 1943, the U.S. was building a new carrier every month. They never got their best pilots back, most of the ones who died at Midway were veterans of China and Pearl Harbor, and Japan couldn't train replacements fast enough. They never recovered their confidence. Yamamoto knew it was over. He wrote in his diary after Midway, "Midway was the beginning of the end. We can no longer win this war. We can only delay the inevitable." He was right. From Midway on, America pushed west, Guadalcanal, where Marines fought for 6 months in the jungle, Tarawa, a tiny island where 1,000 Marines died taking it, Iwo Jima, the famous flag-raising, and 6,800 Marine deaths, Okinawa, the bloodiest battle of the Pacific, with 12,000 U.S. deaths, each battle bringing them closer to Japan. Yamamoto never lived to see the end. He was killed in 1943, when U.S. pilots shot down his plane over the Solomon Islands. They'd intercepted his travel plans, thanks to codebreakers like Rochefort's team. The Yorktown sank on June 7, but her crew never forgot her. In 1998, a team of explorers led by Robert Ballard, who'd found the Titanic, found her wreckage, 2.5 miles below the surface, her hull still intact, her anti-aircraft guns still pointing toward the sky, like she's still ready to fight. "She looked like she was frozen in time," Ballard said. "The paint was still on her hull, the rising sun targets we'd painted on her wings were still visible. It was eerie, but also respectful, like visiting a grave." Midway Atoll today is a national wildlife refuge, run by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's home to millions of seabirds, Lyson albatrosses, boobies, noddies, that nest on the beaches, their calls filling the air. Sea lions bark on the reefs, and green sea turtles crawl up to lay eggs in the sand. There are no hotels, no tourists, just a small team of scientists and rangers, and a memorial. The memorial is on Sand Island, a simple stone marker, with the words, June 4 to 7, 1942, "Here, the United States Navy turned the tide of World War II in the Pacific," carved into it. Every year, on June 4, veterans and their families come to visit. They lay flowers on the marker, say prayers, and tell stories. In 2002, Best, then 89 years old, his lungs still bothering him, but his mind sharp, visited the memorial. He stood there, staring at the marker, and cried. "I lost a lot of good friends here," he said. "But we won. We stopped them. That's what matters." Best got the Navy Cross for sinking the Akagi, the second highest honor a Navy pilot can get. But he never talked much about it. "I was just doing my job," he'd say. The real heroes are the ones who didn't come back. The ones who gave their lives so the rest of us could go home. He retired from the Navy in 1944, moved back to San Diego, and worked as a flight instructor. He lived to be 91, and on his deathbed in 2001, he told his son, "Tell the guys I didn't forget, M. Tell M we won." But Midway's legacy isn't just about ships sunk or planes shot down. It's about the lessons it taught us, lessons that still matter today. First, intelligence wins wars. The US didn't win 'cause we had more ships or planes. We won 'cause we knew Japan's plan. Rochefort's Codebreakers, guys in a basement, with no fanfare, no medals at the time, turned a losing battle into a winning one. Today, that means, in every fight, whether it's a war or a crisis, knowing your enemy is just as important as having the best weapons. Second, arrogance kills. Japan thought they were unbeatable. They thought the US was soft, that we'd give up easily. That arrogance made them careless, Nagumo rearming his planes without checking if the US carriers were nearby, Yamamoto thinking we'd never set a trap. History's full of empires that fell 'cause they thought they could never lose, Rome, Napoleon's France, Hitler's Germany. Midway's just another example. Third, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting anyway. The US pilots at Midway were scared. Best wrote about his hands shaking as he dove toward the Akagi. The Yorktown's crew knew their ship was sinking, but they kept fighting. The torpedo bomber pilots knew their planes were flying coffins, but they still flew low, still attacked. That's courage, the kind that turns despair into hope, that makes ordinary people do extraordinary things. And finally, Midway taught us that even when the odds are stacked against you, you can still win. The US was outnumbered, outgunned, outmatched, but we fought back. We believed in ourselves. We believed in each other. We didn't give up, even when it looked like we had no chance. 80 years later, we still talk about Midway. Not just 'cause it was a great military victory, but 'cause it's a story of hope. A story of how a small group of people, pilots, codebreakers, sailors, marines, can change the course of history. A story of how even in the darkest times, we can find the strength to keep going. The next time you look at a map of the Pacific, find Midway Atoll, a tiny dot in the ocean, easy to miss. But remember what happened there. Remember the men who fought there. Remember that even the smallest places can hold the biggest stories. And remember this, no matter how big the enemy, no matter how long the fight, hope's never lost. It's just waiting for someone to fight for it. That's the legacy of Midway. That's why we'll never forget.